In the summer of 2021, 19-year-old Joshua Griggs from New Mills, County Tyrone, had started a summer job at Contract Services DNG. Josh, a dedicated full-time student, was not only a skilled young Gaelic football player, but also an enthusiastic youth team coach. His exceptional talents on the field earned him the title of Reserve Player of the Year for his club, the Brackerville Owen Rose. It was his first summer job, and he was brought in as a gully drain cleansing operator for the company on May the 31st of 2021. After a very short induction session, he was out working on the roads the same day. The following week, on the 8th of June, he was tasked with assisting John Fagan, who worked as the driver of the gully cleaning lorry. The teenager's responsibilities involved operating outside the vehicle and utilising the drain's cleaning equipment. As the vehicle travelled along a street in Banbridge, Joshua stood on the lorry footsteps. However, as Fagan manoeuvred around a corner at a slow pace, tragedy struck. Josh became caught beneath the front side of the near wheel. It is unclear whether he tried to step down or slipped, but when Joshua was trapped beneath the wheel, his abdominal organs and chest were crushed, causing fatal injuries. A witness saw this unfold, and obviously, standing on a lorry whilst moving would be against any safety regulations in any company. According to Fagan, who was visibly shook up by the incident, the company had given him no training. Barrister Fiona O'Kane said, he maintained that the practice of the gully operative standing on the step of the lorry was common practice, and there had been no previous issues with other gully operatives. Fagan confessed to causing death by careless driving and violating health and safety laws. He received a suspended 6-month prison sentence, along with a 1-year driving ban, but he wasn't the only one to blame. The director of the firm, Patrick McKenna, was also found guilty of breaching health and safety laws. The judge said, the practice of allowing someone to hang off the lorry is described, and the degree of danger that action foreseeably created was high. Contract Services DNG were then fined £80,000. Joshua was described as a promising, much-loved young man. His teammates gathered together for his funeral. Joshua's brother said, some people are siblings by blood, but we were siblings who were really, really close. Since he was my only brother, he was my hero. All I wanted to do was look up to him and follow in his footsteps. 59-year-old Liam Manley was a vulnerable man who had fallen on hard times. He was an alcoholic and had been for many years, living in the Simon Community Shelter in Cork, Ireland. On May the 11th of 2013, Liam, who had just been turned away from a hostel for being intoxicated, was sitting outside a shop in Cork City. This is where he came across David O'Loughlin. According to David, he felt sorry for the man, so he invited Liam back to his apartment for a drink. It is unclear what happened next, but at the apartment, the two men got into some sort of altercation. David then attacked Liam, brutally battering him and breaking his ribs. David then pushed Liam out of the door and forced him into a rubbish chute located in the hallway of his apartment. Liam Manley's brother said, this man attacked my brother. He smashed his ribcage in, and he put him down a chute. He threw him down a chute. My brother was just 5'3". This man was 6'2". The chute was used to transport rubbish bags to the apartment basement. In the rubbish chute was a slight bend, which would occasionally become blocked with rubbish bags. Liam, who was now barely conscious, had multiple injuries and also a broken ribcage, was trapped within the chute. The next day, the apartment maintenance man Francis Ford was informed of a blockage in the chute, in which he would have to rod. He began rodding, removing blocked bags, when he noticed blood dripping down. He said, a whole lot of red liquid started coming out of the chute. I was thinking it was blood, but then I said to myself that it couldn't be, and thought it must be some sort of sauce. I continued to try and free it, and eventually I got hold of it with the rods, and it came down. It was a body. He then exited the building and rang the police. Due to CCTV footage, they quickly linked David to the death and arrested him. Liam's brother said, his whole ribcage was destroyed. He was hanging upside down. He knew he was dying, and he had nowhere to go. He got an awful death. You wouldn't get it in a horror film. Liam's cause of death was mechanical asphyxia after being trapped face first in the rubbish. His last moments would have been truly terrifying. According to David, Liam attacked him first, and he thought Liam would pass through the chute safely, landing on the rubbish below. Obviously, the jury did not believe him, and he was sentenced to life in prison in January of 2019. Liam's family described David as sick and twisted, and went on to say, Liam was a kind, caring, and quiet man who loved life. We as a family can't find words to describe how we felt when our brother and uncle's life was tragically taken. To die in such horrific and frightening circumstances is something no one should have to endure. Our next story is truly heartbreaking and takes place in Antwerp, Belgium. On the 2nd of April 2024, 4-year-old Cedra Atman was sent off to St. Martinus School, as she usually was. At 11 AM, she was in a gymnastic class when disaster struck. Somehow, Cedra managed to get her head trapped within the bars of a climbing frame. It became apparent quickly that after being trapped, Cedra was unable to breathe. The teacher then managed to free Cedra from the bars. Her family told local media. The gymnastics teacher started resuscitation attempts, and afterwards the ambulances took over. They had to resuscitate her for 45 minutes. Shortly after noon, the small girl arrived at the hospital in critical condition. Cedra's family felt some form of hope on Sunday when she showed signs of stabilising, but their optimism was shattered when her condition took a turn for the worse on Monday, ultimately leading to her passing the next day. As this incident is still unfolding, her exact cause of death has not been released. It was initially reported that she choked on the equipment herself, but it is more likely that she suffered a heart attack due to the lack of oxygen. Her mother told local media, Cedra was always a very healthy and cheerful child. We are also very angry. The school director, Chute, also told the media, this incident has hit us very hard. We are all trying to process it together. We have yet to learn the exact cause of death. As there are a lot of questions about that, it is not yet clear what exactly happened. Every year, over 100 people are killed due to avalanches. Avalanches pose a great threat due to the potential for victims to become trapped underneath tons of snow. Beyond the initial trauma and suffocation risks, survivors face the dangers of serious injury, hypothermia, and asphyxiation as air pockets within the snow diminish. Humans sink quickly in snow, but 93% of people survive if they are dug out within the first 15 minutes. In 2018, 25-year-old Swedish native Daniel Akerson was skiing at the Gulmarg ski resort in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. On that day, in January of 2018, Daniel and his friend decided to go to an area in the resort known as backcountry. They were warned multiple times against this, as backcountry is dangerous for even the most experienced skier. One skiing guide said, usually, blasting is carried out at a ski resort to make the area safe for skiers. However, the area where the blasting doesn't take place is called backcountry and is prone to avalanches and considered dangerous for skiers. At approximately 1:20 in the afternoon, an avalanche occurred whilst the two were skiing at backcountry. One spokesperson said, at 1:30, a ski patrol team received reports of an avalanche involving 2 people. The ski patrol arrived to the site immediately with the aid of snowmobiles. The ski patrol teams then ventured to the mountain to find the missing duo. Daniel was then found. The spokesperson said, the ski patrol team shoveled out the skier, who was unconscious, and transported him to ski patrol headquarters, where doctors evaluated the body and shortly pronounced him dead. Remarkably, his friend Benjamin, who was also found trapped under the snow, survived. The spokesperson went on to say, the skiers were informed not to exit the ski area. It appears the victims triggered the avalanche, and the deceased was carried over a frozen waterfall, estimated at 30 feet in height. This likely contributed to the trauma, which resulted in his death. The skier had ignored the advisory and has ventured into the outbound ski area where he was caught in an avalanche. The skiing centre vowed to make their resort safer, introducing more patrol teams and making it very clear to foreign tourists that they should never venture into backcountry. Dying in a sauna is probably more common than you would think. According to the Helsinki Times, sauna heat kills 30 to 40 people in Finland alone each year. Although most deaths in saunas are due to intoxication and natural causes, there have been a few where people have become trapped in saunas, therefore burning alive. In January of 2015, a man by the name of Denis Antoporek told his family he was going to relax in the sauna at his housing complex in Miami, Florida. After not hearing from her dad for a while, Laura decided to check on him. What she found was truly horrifying. In an interview with the media, she said, when I opened the door, I looked and there was a black man in the sauna. It wasn't my dad, so I shut the door and I looked. The clothes hanging, it was his clothes. Ronnie Antoporek, Dennis's wife, came to see what the commotion was about when she saw her husband. His body was reportedly stuck to the bench and the floor of the sauna, melted. After, the family would sue the housing complex as it came to light that the sauna had a faulty timer, which kept the door locked, trapping Dennis inside. Elite management associated were responsible for maintaining the sauna and failed to make sure it was safe. The results of this suit was never made public. After the incident, his wife said, "I close my eyes and I just see his face charred, and this sounds horrible, but there was skin on the floor and on the bench, and we shouldn't have had to see that." Another case like this occurred in the quaint town of Jičín in the Czech Republic. An unnamed mother and daughter were staying with friends when they decided to use the sauna that they had on the property. The ladies, who were aged 45 to 65, made their way to the sauna and sat down. After an hour and a half, the owner of the property was wondering what they were doing as they hadn't come back. She assumed that they were out of the sauna, but unsure where. The owner of the house made her way to the sauna, and what she discovered was horrific. She found the two on the floor in the sauna, the glass on the door broken, but the door locked. It turned out that the door handle had snapped off whilst they were inside, causing them to be trapped within the sauna. A spokesperson said the mother and daughter were taking a sauna at their friend's place in a garden colony. The owner thought they were taking too long to come out, so she went to check and found them lying on the floor. The handle on the sauna door broke, and the women were trapped. They tried to break the window on the door but failed. When the paramedics arrived on the scene, both the mother and daughter were pronounced dead.
This case takes place in Thurcroft, South Yorkshire. Lee Bowman was a good man with a troubled past. At the age of 8, whilst attending a boarding school for dyslexic children, Lee was abused by one of the teachers who should have looked after him. This incident would result in his drug use and addiction problems that started at the age of 16. His life stabilised for a little while, and Lee went on to have 2 children. But sadly, his demons would catch up with him. Lee's medical records indicated a background of anxiety, depression, and substance abuse, which would become more apparent as his children grew up. His daughter stated that she was around 16 when his drug use started, but he became severely mentally unwell when she was around 9. By 2021, Lee was an alcoholic. He was last seen by his family on the 29th of October 2021, before heading towards his girlfriend's house in Thurcroft, South Yorkshire. He stayed there for 2 nights before the two got into an argument whilst he was drunk. She claimed they had a disagreement that led to her brother hitting Lee in the mouth and kicking him out. He was seen by a family member in the street, disorientated and drunk. But after this, Lee vanished. He was reported missing a few days later, but the police never took it seriously. One South Yorkshire PCSO even said, "The missing person can be seen in Rotherham town centre on a daily basis. He is hanging around with local drug users and drinkers." But this would later turn out to be false. Nottinghamshire Police transferred the case to South Yorkshire Police on the 28th of November, closing it briefly before reopening on the 7th of December at the family's request. Detectives took over a week later, leading to the discovery of Mr. Bowman's body on the 3rd of January 2022, near his girlfriend's home in Thurcroft. This was 2 months after he was reported missing. His body was found trapped between 2 narrow fence panels separating 2 gardens. It is unclear how Lee ended up trapped between the fence panels, and due to composition, they were unable to determine the cause of death. But 4 explanations were given. These were hypothermia, positional asphyxia, drug or alcohol use, and liver disease. Sadly, the unconscious bias from the police meant they never searched properly for Lee. They assumed he was drunk somewhere, or that he didn't want to be found. Lee's daughter hopes his death will change how the police tackle vulnerable missing people. She said, "I'm glad that things are having to change, as I don't want my dad to have died for nothing, and I'm hoping that missing people with vulnerabilities such as addiction are handled with care and the respect they deserve." The pathologist couldn't guarantee he died that night. What if someone had gone out to look for him? Would he have been found alive? Would we have been able to save him? I hope it was sudden. I hope he passed away really quick, and I hope he wasn't trapped for days.
Arby's, established in 1964 in Ohio, has become a global fast food staple renowned for its succulent roast beef sandwiches and signature curly fries, and it boasts over 3,400 locations worldwide. On the 11th of May, Noyette Lee arrived at the store she was working at in New Iberia, Louisiana, early morning so she could perform her opening duties. This was part of the general manager job and was usually done alone, as other employees would not arrive for their shift until 10 a.m. Her son, who also worked at the store, dropped her off and returned at 10 a.m. to start his shift. He entered the Arby's but couldn't find his mother anywhere, which left him understandably confused. After a brief look around, he decided to check the walk-in freezer. The walk-in freezer's door had a history of being faulty, which was well known to most of the staff who worked at the store. When he opened the door, he found his mother face down in the fetal position, frozen on the floor. There was blood on the inside of the door, which showed that once she was locked in the freezer, she, and I quote, beat her hands bloody trying to escape. It was unclear how long she'd been in the freezer, but we do know her death would have been slow and painful, and also completely avoidable. It turned out that the freezer door had been broken for 9 months. Employees would go on record saying that to open the door they would use a screwdriver, and to keep the door from closing on them, they would use a box of oil propped up against it. This also wasn't Noyette Lee's store. She was on a temporary assignment there for 4 weeks, so it's unclear if she knew about the problems with the door. After the incident, her 4 children filed a $1 million lawsuit against the franchise owner and the company. The lawsuit filed alleged negligence, gross negligence, and wrongful death. It is claimed that the company was aware of the faulty freezer door, and it was labelled as being in an extremely dangerous condition since at least August 2022, with no effort to repair it. The court documents read, Arby's was negligent and grossly negligent in failing to inspect and train the personnel at the subject location. It went on to say, defendants acted with flagrant and malicious disregard of plaintiff's health and safety and for the health and safety of others. This case is still ongoing, and I hope her family get the justice they deserve. In June of 2023, heavy rainfall saw much of the state of Chiapas in southern Mexico flooded. Overnight, from June the 23rd to June the 24th, the streets were submerged under floodwaters, reaching depths of up to 1 metre. Vehicles were left stranded and homes abandoned. On Saturday the 24th, in the middle of a downpour, a man found his truck stuck in the flooded water. Ariel Nunez had noticed the man struggling and, being the good Samaritan he was, gathered his neighbours to help push the man's truck to safety. He and 6 other men managed to push the car to safety, but then tragedy struck. Ariel, who was now walking back through the rainwater, was suddenly sucked into an unprotected storm drain. His friends watched him go down and tried to grab him, but they were unable to do so. The storm drain emptied into the Sabinal River, so 30 firefighters were sent there to search for him. Sadly, there was no sign of the missing biologist. It wouldn't be until 40 hours later they would find his body, which was floating in the Grijalva River, which was 12 kilometers from the drain exits. It was unclear how long Ariel survived after being sucked into the storm drain, but it is hard to imagine how terrifying being trapped in that pipe would have been. Tragically, Ariel left behind a wife and 2 children. On the 14th of January 2020, 24-year-old engineer Lewis McFarlane was sent to the Muller Yogurt and Desserts factory in Market Drayton to fix a lift that had been broken for a few weeks. Lewis, along with 2 other lift engineers from Lift Monitoring Systems, initially arrived at the site to work on a separate lift. However, whilst they were there, they were asked to address a malfunction in the door opening mechanism of one of the lift landing doors. As they worked to resolve the issue, Mr. McFarlane found himself positioned on top of the lift car. One engineer was inside the lift and another stationed outside on the landing. The lift was put into inspection mode, which gave Mr. McFarlane control of the lift from its rooftop, allowing him to support his colleague inside the cabin in addressing the malfunction. Whilst Lewis was on top of the lift suddenly switched from inspection mode into normal mode. Without realising the lift was in normal mode, Lewis continued to work on top. However, After resetting the lift would move either to the bottom or the top of the shaft after 120 seconds of inactivity. The lift began moving up, which jolted Lewis, causing him to fall into the void between the lift and the lift wall. Here, he was crushed and died. It was stated at some point Lewis had been standing on the roof of the lift. The lift moved suddenly and unexpectedly. Lewis became trapped between the lift and the lift wall and suffered fatal injuries. His colleagues tried to release him, but it was too late. Liam had died from his injuries. According to the news report, the sudden transition caused the lift to move at its normal speed, trapping him in a void between the lift car and the structural elements of the lift shaft. An investigation into the incident was launched, and they found that the void in which Liam was trapped was supposed to be covered or sheeted. If this was done, he could have escaped unharmed. Lift monitoring systems were then fined £200,000 after pleading guilty to breaching the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. The inspector said, "This tragic and entirely preventable incident led to the loss of a much-loved son. The risks associated with working on lifts and the necessary safety measures were well known to the company." He went on to say, "Sadly, in this case, the employer failed to fulfill its responsibilities to ensure that simple and established safety measures, like sheeting covering the void that Lewis became trapped in, were in place. Had the employer informed the lift owner of this risk and insisted on installing the sheeting before commencing the work, or refused to work until the sheeting was fitted, this tragic incident simply would have not happened." Although truly tragic, his mother said that his death was not in vain, stating, "As a family, losing our lovely Lewis and his future has had a massive impact on all of our lives. Nothing can bring my son home. However, if future lives and families can be protected as a result of this outcome, then Lewis's death hasn't been in vain." Muller were never charged. I personally go to the gym often, and I'm sure if you do too, you can relate to going too heavy on the bench press, forcing your spotter to help lift the bar back up. However, there have been cases where people who have been lifting haven't had the luxury of someone else there, and have been trapped by the weight, causing serious injury or even death. This happened in 2015, when 15-year-old rugby player Ben Shaw, who was living in Australia, made his way to the gym to work out before getting on with the rest of his day. Ben was found later on trapped under the weight by a fellow gym-goer. The partner of the man who found Ben said to the press, "When he got there, it was quiet. There was nobody around, and he was about to start his workout when he looked over and saw the 15-year-old boy just lying on the bench with a bar right across his neck. Ben had loaded 98 kilograms, or 216 pounds, onto the bar. When the man found him, he ran over and lifted the bar off him. He called for help, and 2 employees rushed to the scene and performed CPR on the teenager until the ambulance arrived and he was rushed to hospital. Sadly, there was nothing more that doctors could do, and Ben was pronounced dead in the hospital. It was reported that he could have been underneath the bar for 30 minutes. Another case of this happening was in Ross-on-Sea in North Wales. On September the 9th, 2023, Jill Embleton was worried about her neighbour Carl Hughes, who she hadn't seen for a little while. 60-year-old Carl was known for taking in his newspaper every morning, but they lay stacked up outside of his house. This was very unusual, and because she hadn't seen him for 3 days, she alerted his friend Philip Colligan to investigate. The two made their way into his flat, where they found Carl on a bench in his bedroom. He was crushed under the bar, which had 60 kilograms of weight on it, and was unresponsive. They called authorities, who pronounced Carl dead on the scene. Tests were done, and they found alcohol in his blood. The coroner stated, "It seems to be a terribly tragic set of circumstances and an accident on his part. Moral of the story, always try and get a spotter when you can." As always, this is not an AI channel, I do everything myself, and if you appreciate my work, subscribe, and if you want to go the extra step to support the channel, maybe consider becoming a member.